Cavite Mutiny, The Contemporaries. El Motín de Cavite or Cavite Mutiny was an insurrection by Filipino military men at Fort San Felipe, the Spanish arsenal in Cavite, 107 Philippines Island, in the January 20, 1872. Around 200 colonial soldiers and laborers who had been recruited locally rose up, hoping the insurrection would spread to an entire country. When the rebellion failed, government soldiers murdered several of the rebels and started to suppress the growing nationalist movement in the Philippines. According to many academics, was the commencement of the Filipino nationalism and the precursor to the Philippine Revolution of 1896. Father Salvador Ponce and Apolinario Mabini were two other individuals of around the same generation as those who had just received treatment, but they had no directed connection with those who had lived at the time of the occurrences. Both authors briefly discuss the 1872 events in relation to their earliest writing. Additional people from the same generation, Apolinario Mabini and Father Salvador Ponce. One chapter of Mabini's posthumously released book La Revolución Filipina, titled Causa y Efecto de la Ejecución de los Padres Burgos, Gómez y Zamora. Without claiming to have first-hand knowledge of the events, Mabini makes it abundantly plain that the three priests were not responsible for the uprising while remaining neutral regarding its origin. It was utilized by their adversaries, primarily the friars, based on the circumstances, but also with the government support to bring those three martyred men to trial and execution. Instead of narrating a narrative, Mabini's chapter concentrates on the fraction of the martyr priest in the revolution. He seems to be defending Plauchut's tale, whose translation and published in La Solidaridad, while Mabini was actively connected with the newspaper assistants in Manila, as there as a served advance of factual fact. On the scaffold, Burgos argued in innocence. An Augustinian friar named Ponce first arrived in the Philippines in 1884, abandoned his order in Manila in 1899, and spent the following 10 years collaborating with the Iglesia Filipina Independientes founders and producing articles critical of the friars. He joined in Augustinians after the last finding peace with the Catholic Church, and he lived out the remainder of his days in the German monastery. All of his writings should be used with caution because he retracted his anti-friar and anti-Catholic writings, as the wolf devoted in the large portion of the rest of his life to disproving them. This is especially true for those that could be considered historically accurate because they were written in the extreme haste with a similar level of carelessness and exaggeration. El Clero Filipino and Defensa del Clero Filipino are the two pieces at discussion here. The first of them only repeats Plauchut's story, and aside from that, offers the further information that could not be found in Montero y Vidal. In fact, it is deficient in information overall. The book includes the collection of the biographies and bibliographies on notable secular priests from the Philippines, including Burgos and Gomez. The author, Manuel Artigas y Cuerva. In the first 3 decades following the revolution, Manuel Artigas y Cuerva published more about Philippine history than any other author. Although he recovered the event of 1872 in a number of periodical publications and as a part of book on more general topics, Los Sucesos de 1872 was his most important publication. This book is the most comprehensive description on the Cavite Revolt and its backdrop that has been published up to this point, despite its relatively haphazard organization. This There are the considerable likelihood that Artigas who work at the National achieves collection and access to paper that have since vanished or been destroyed, leaving them. Only his volume had access to at least some of them. Finally, Artigas incorporates portion of the Rigidor version, as well as those from the Bernabea and Ecogoyen version into a single report. He either overlooked the purposefully chose to ignore the discrepancy between Rigidor's recollection and those who had expected document while making his decision. There is a considerable likelihood that Artigas, who work at the National Archive collection and access to paper that have since vanished or been destroyed, leaving only in his volume, had access to at least some of them. This can be better understood by looking at the origins of progression of the tale of Recoleto Friar, who accused and impersonating Burgos to spark the Cavite uprising. The assumption that people familiar with Burgos will enough to recognize him, at least by the sight, raises significant and verisimilitude in the eyes of critical historian. With Artigas published histories of the events of 1872, based on immediate knowledge of direct information, come to an end. Second, he tends to compile knowledge of various sides and writing without providing much evidence of his own critical assessment. The claim that Artigas was an cajon desastre as made of the Trinidad H. Pardo de Tavera is not entirely untrue, even though the occasionally made of the attempt to apply historical critique to his sources, and in case of some Rigidor's excesses and contradiction, he cannot be described as a critical historian. Only three significant accounts of the events, those Montero y Vidal, Rigidor, and Padre de Tavera, are unquestionably independent and merit serious study. If it could be established that Plauchut was indeed in Manila in 1872, his narrative might be included for what titled information it might have in its own, unrelated to Rigidor. However, there is no evidence that he was in Manila in 1872. And Regidor contains all the information that is absolutely reliable in his narrative. Regidor is the only source of the idea that there was planned and coordinated conspiracy among the friar to incite an uprising that would allow to them put an end on their opponents. Regidor's description contained blatantly erroneous claims. The claim that the friar mimicking Burgos was used to carry out such a provocation first appears in the torture extorted the confession of the friar executed on Bonifacio's order in 1897. Only Montero fully upholds the official thesis that the mutiny was a component of a larger uprising intended to achieve independence. The other dispute it, despite Regidor and Plauchut's explanation appearing to contain a number of apparent contradictions, as well as a number of extremely improbable details in dialogue. The general claim made by the Padre de Tavera that sizable group of conservative Manila Spaniards, including many of most friars, were suspicious of the Filipino priests and other liberal reformists from the time to De La Torre and were quick to make the Cavite Mutiny a revolution aimed at independence, and were even to favor drastic punishment meted out is not necessarily invalidated by lack of the solid basis for this allegation against the friars. The narrative Artigas, out of all those that are now existent, combines the most information, evidence, and detail with at least minimal amount of critical evaluation of his sources. However, because he relies too heavily on Rigidor and also uses Shaki like the Pernaveja Ecogoyen tales, it falls far short offering an accurate account of the events of 1872. The incomplete narrative reprinted in pastels, and less obviously that of the Gonvantes, reject Montero's whole viewpoint without unambiguously reporting the claim that just 4 locals committed mutiny. And lastly, the account of Pardo de Tavera presiding from the emotional anti-friar tone that pervades. It gives evidence of being the most reliable, even though fairly general account except for the failure to recognize that De La Torre had also been suspicious of the Filipino reformists. That of Montero, apart from its anti-Filipino cone, it is supposition of the revolutionary conspiracy, contains the most details and, to all appearance, most reliable account of the actual course of the revolt itself, as well as of execution of the three priests. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.